Let's get going. Okay. This is the Reflector Reflections podcast. My name is Annie. Join me as we sample around the world the amazing humans that exist in the land of human design, gene keys, astrology, metaphysics, all things. In this series, we are showcasing guests in the human design community and bringing recognition to them in the work that they do in the human design space, and also get to know them a little bit better and how they experiment and navigate their unique design. Today's beautiful featured guest is Jaclyn Michelle DeForge, the leading lady at Interior Creature, an amazing hub of resources into human design, gene keys, astrology, and shadow work. Jaclyn is a 1-3 generator with the Cross of Eden. Not just that, but she's a birth chart alchemist, practitioner, and teacher, and is passionate about radically compassionate self-inquiry and doing the inner work. Welcome, beautiful soul.
Oh, thank you. It was so fun. Listen, I was like, oh, I do all that. Thank you. It's so nice to sit here with you.
It's interesting when somebody actually reads a little sample of your bio and you're like, oh my gosh, I really do all of that, don't I? And that's only just scratching the surface, I'm sure.
Yeah.
How are you? This is so
I'm
exciting.
good. I'm so excited to connect with you as well. Reflectors are my favorite type in human design. I have no qualms about saying that out loud. I love working with them. I love supporting them. So I'm really excited to be sitting with you.
Yeah. One of my friends in the reflector space, Jody, she's a 6'2". She loves your stuff and she's always talking about it. And so you sort of like came up and she was just like, you know, and I'm like, I need to talk to you. But
Oh,
as we do in this podcast, we get a little bit deep. And I want to know, we want to know about you. We want to sample you, Jaclyn. We want to know what you're about. So could you share with us how this journey started for you? How did you find human design or human design find you?
oh my goodness. When I was a little kid, I was in the broom closet, so to speak. I was very into astrology and tarot and like Bigfoot and the paranormal. Like if it was like ultra occult, whatever, I thought it was fascinating, but it didn't. I was raised Catholic. So that I always felt a little bit like, is this okay? Is this something I should be dabbling in? And I kind of tried to like keep it on the down low. But I kind of also like fell apart from myself, or kind of like fell away from myself as I got into the teenage years, my adulthood. I ended up in a job in a corporate space. I started in education right after college and then ended up working for a major educational publisher, traveling all over the continental United States, teaching teachers how to teach kids how to read. And my job basically ate my life. Like I was successful with big air quotes, according to, I think, what the dominant culture's definition of success was. But I was working 80-hour weeks. I was not nurturing my body with good food, good nutrition. I was basically eating out of convenience, sleeping less than 6 hours a night a lot of the times, waking up in hotels all over the country. And I had a very bad drinking problem at the time. I had a very abusive relationship with alcohol. And I remember waking up one day, I think I was at a hotel in like Kansas of all places. And I was like, I can't anymore. I just can't. Like I had the biggest sacral no, not knowing that's what it was at the time, but just my whole body had just like rejected that life. And so I quit my corporate job, not knowing at all what I was going to do next, just knowing my body was in like intense, just like adrenal meltdown. And so I took like 3 or 4 months to just kind of sleep and try to like, come back to myself. And I just kept hitting a wall when it came to like, well, what do I want to do next? Do I want to go back into this corporate space, into the same field? But that didn't feel good. And I was like, well, when was the last time I was really like lit up by something? 14-year-old me when I'm doing tarot and I'm like digging into astrology. And so I started listening to a lot of spiritual podcasts to kind of like, just reawaken any semblance of who I was outside of, my job, the position I'd taken on for other people. And a comment had popped up in one of the Facebook groups for this podcast I listened to. And the person was basically like, I don't recognize myself anymore. I had my job has eaten my life. My children have eaten my life. Like, I don't know who I am outside of mom and my title. Like, does anyone have a resource that can support me? And in the comment section, somebody had said, human design changed my life. And I was like, probably halfway into a bottle of wine at that point. And I was like, ooh, tell me more about this thing. I've never heard of it. And I just like went down this rabbit hole, like pulled out the credit card, bought every book course I could get my hands on. Just like a few days later, everything arrived in the mail. And I spent the next 6 months like teaching myself the system more to figure out who am I outside of everything that I've taken on. And then it actually became something I got really passionate about because the more charts I ran, the more I was like, my gosh, this fits my mom. And this is my dad to a T. And oh my gosh, this is my brother and my ex and my friends. And I just realized like this is such powerful medicine. It's such a powerful tool. But at the time, now this is back in like 2017, 2018, the information that you could find online was scarce. And the
Yeah.
things you could find were jargony and it just wasn't accessible. So that's kind of what catalyzed my journey into like blogging about it, trying to make it as accessible for people as possible because I wanted to create the resource I didn't have when I was kind of falling down the rabbit hole myself. And then it just, serendipitously turned into the thing that I now do. And now flash forward 5 years later, I've been in business and I get to read charts and walk people through just that kind of epiphany to experimentation to embodiment kind of process that we all go through when we're in this big experiment with our design.
Oh, wow. And I really just want to honor you on that, like that burnout. Like we obviously this is, predominantly reflectless here. And so we know what that feels like, but we don't know what it feels like. And so listening to you talk about that, like overworking and then having this mass burnout where you've just literally got to go, you know,
Mhm.
what's not lighting me up. It's just so beautiful to hear that. I love listening to people share that and you didn't even know it at the time. We just
Ah,
naturally live our design, don't we?
yeah, that was the thing I thought was so interesting was like how much I was intuitively doing without
Yeah.
realizing I was intuitively doing it. Like my sacral, that's what that was in that hotel room in Kansas. My whole body was like, no,
Yeah.
you have not listened. And I know with reflectors, we talk a lot about what happens when you're trying to behave like a generator or a manifesting generator because of the dominant conditioning. But sometimes I think there's maybe not enough attention paid to when generators and man gens are out of a sacral alignment. That burnout is, I mean, it's different things, but
Yeah.
it can be really really destructive as well. So
Yeah.
the joy is supposed to what we do. Joy is always what we put in our gas tank metaphorically, and I had not been doing that for a very long time. So
Yeah.
just human design happened to be an amazing medicine to kind of bring me back to myself.
The gift that keeps on giving. Thank you
Mhm.
for sharing that because I do have a lot of generators in my life. And, it has been one of those things that since learning human design over all these years, being
Mhm.
very privy to the generator type and overdoing it. So I'm one of those, I try not to be too bossy in their face, but just sort of like hand on their shoulder to say, it's
Mhm.
okay. You don't have to do that. I can do that,
Mhm.
this needing to constantly go all the time and not honoring that it's very I'm very aware of it.
Mhm.
So you can stop sometimes, friends. It's
Mhm.
okay. It's
And
okay
when
to
you
rest.
combine that with like an open heart center, like I was raised by two parents who have open hearts, and I have an open heart center in my chart. And so I don't have that natural like thing in my body that will tell me that's a bridge too far. Like you can't do that. I have that mirroring behavior of like wanting to commit, wanting to give someone the gift of like, oh, we can have that joy together of me committing to the thing you want me to. That can be an addictive behavior without even realizing it. So like that was a whole other kind of like, wow, I have codependent tendencies. I need to look into this. Like, yeah.
I also love that you naturally, again, intuitively went back to what brought you joy. That is such a just a simple tool to have in your toolbox. Like let's sit there and go, something is completely out of alignment. I'm drinking too much. I'm just tapping out. I'm trying to escape the world. I'm burnt out. But what did I like to do that made me really happy? I think it's just such a simple tool. So I'm glad that you found yours.
Thank you. I am too.
And many people are. And
Mm,
this is such a like a I say this lovingly, but your site is such a beast because you provide so much information. It's a beautiful beast. It's just like
mm.
anyone with that first line just goes, "Oh my God, look at all this information I can inhale."
Yeah, that it takes a 1-3 and someone who's sacredly lit up. Like that was like I literally for a few months when I launched my site back in 2018, I just could not stop writing. It was pouring out of me and I'm like I cannot wait for people to read this, for people to have this tool. So I'm glad it feels that way because that was always my goal to kind of have a robust kind of
Yeah.
like introduction to kind of that felt accessible and funny and didn't take itself too seriously. And yeah, so I take
And
that with it's a beast. I love that. I'm going to start
it's
referring to it as my beautiful beast I
a
built.
beautiful beast. Yes, yes, because it's just a behemoth.
Mm.
Oh God, now I'm getting a bit wordsmithy here. All right, let's go down the nicer words. It's not just that though. It's not even your website. It's your online presence and just consistently showing up. And if we ever want to know something, I know that I can go straight to your Instagram and look, and it's just, oh, this is interesting. I didn't know this before. How does that feel in your body? Is it because you're coming at this with a place of joy? Does it feel good to be showing up like this?
It does. It's funny. I think the 1-3, like my first line, kind of dominant energy plus the sacral yes for it. And being raised by a professor, like my father's also a 1-3. Just I love and be having an education background. Like one of the things that gives me joy is teaching. And
Mm.
when I see these things and I'm like, I can share this with I know I'm not the only one going through this. This is relevant to me today. I bet it's relevant to other people. Like, and how can I explain this in the most accessible way possible? Gives me so much joy to do and to create. And then, to get people in the comments and asking questions, it just like that lights me up like nothing else. So because it's a joyful thing, but it wasn't always like that. I think when I first came onto Instagram, it's really easy to fall down that comparison rabbit hole and look at like, oh, that person's so much more attractive than I am, and oh, their content looks so much more professional or whatever. Like I had to almost like get out of my own way and say, we're not going to play the comparison game. Like, how can I serve? How can I show
Yeah,
up for my community? How can I serve in a way that still feels joyful? And if it stops feeling joyful, I need to stop doing it because that's the wrong vibes. Like that's not gonna, yeah.
I love that. That hit me right in the heart. It's a really big thing, the comparison. And because, as you were saying, when human design and this other information came out, there wasn't a lot of accessible information. And now it's everywhere.
Mm-hmm,
And often it can be very confusing information.
mm-hmm,
So people, when they first discover this, I know reflectors and even generators, I suppose, when they first find this, it's just like,
mm-hmm.
whoa, this is overwhelming.
And
So
there's a
I'm,
lot of transmissions of it that are very restrictive because I think because of the old paradigm that we're kind of falling away from, the old paradigm loves things that are very black and white. And human design isn't like that. Like anyone who's gone down this rabbit hole knows between astrology, the gene keys, human design, nuance, specificity, depth, like it's like an onion with like infinite layers. Like we're constantly peeling back. And I think that's another thing that can be really, excuse you, sorry about that. One of my dogs went after another one of my dogs. Apologies. It could be a little bit of a menagerie in here.
I love it.
Yeah, the littlest one just kind of like, I just don't know where I'm going. I'm sorry. But as I was saying, like sometimes I think the information too can feel restrictive.
Mm,
And my goal is always to make it as expansive and spacious as possible. So not only do you have like, some people present it as another set of rules they have to follow. And it's like, oh, wait, no. Like, so it's not just like the amount of information, it's sometimes the information is like butting up against other things you're reading. And it can feel a little bit like, I don't know where to turn in all of this.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm really glad that you said that because it's so true. And I think something that I feel really passionate about is, I've come from the whole like this is how it's done. I'm reading the book, this is how it's done, and this is the language that I need to use. And then you kind
Mhm,
of like start, because it's everyone needs to receive something differently. It's
mhm,
still the same information, it's just being delivered sometimes in a different way. But the facts behind it are still relevant.
mhm.
So thank you for providing your lens and your sort of thoughts into a world so people can sort of like digest it a little bit easier instead of chewing, like masticating on a
Mhm.
big fat steak that just doesn't want
Mm,
to go down the throat.
yep. So it's
Wow,
been a little
it's a
overcooked.
metaphor day today.
No, it's true. I bring that out in people. I tend to speak in analogies and metaphors. That might be me. You might be sampling my allegorical energy here.
When you found this about you, you've said that, your parents and things like that. Did you go down that rabbit hole of like doing your whole family's chart? Can you
Mhm.
share a little bit of that?
Oh, of course. So my mother is what I would consider like woo curious. But again, she was also raised Catholic. Both of my parents were raised in kind of large Catholic, either French Catholic or Irish Catholic families, where like the spiritual wasn't exactly like there was one way to do it, right? Let's talk about dogma. Catholic Church was very like, this is the way it is, and this is the way that it is, and we don't ask questions. So as my mom has kind of like, we've grown up kind of together as adults now, she definitely is more open to these kind of things. And so when I approached her initially and I was like, when were you born? I need that information. Like my little Catholic grandmother found my mother's birth certificate and found her time of birth, which I thought was so great. Like she figured it out for my dad, my brother, and just going down the rabbit hole of like, okay, now let me understand them through this lens. What can this expand my understanding of? How can this support, maybe things that were tough as a child or things that maybe were points of tension. Now I can look it through the eyes of empathy and go, oh, maybe this is why. And it also made sense why my father and I, so my father is a 1-3 splenic projector, and he's only got his spleen and his root defined. And I always say I'm weird for a generator because I'm only spleen, sacral, root, and then everything else in my chart is open. Yeah. And so growing up with that kind of like, he and I have always felt very close. We're both 1-3s. He has the cross of rulership. So he's a professor, like he's very kind of academic. And the thing that he and I share in our charts too is we both have a mix of variables. So we have some of our arrows face right, some of our arrows face left. So like we're very kind of spanning this kind of divide between the old way and the new way. I like to look at the arrows like the variables very holistically. Then we have my brother and my mom who are both quad right. My brother is completely defined except for his solar plexus. He's got a split definition. He's the only one in our family with a split. The rest of us are all single definition, which I think is also the reason because he's so defined and split that he's always felt a little bit different than the rest of us in that way. And then my mom's a man gen, and she's got like a perfect circle in terms of her circuitry. Her throat is connected to her spleen, connected to her root, to her sacral, to her solar plexus, and back up. And like, again, she's got emotional authority. So it was an interesting, it made so much sense thinking about why as a child, like I felt like a carbon copy of my father, and why we both have the channel of struggle. So we both have very specific, like needs to feel purposeful, needs to feel of service. My brother has that with us as well. He went into the military. He just finished his career, in the special forces, supporting, being a combat medic. So it's just interesting how to look at the stories of us and the things we came to independent of knowing any of this information. So like I didn't discover any of this until my early to mid 30s, looking back and going, wow, we really have been following our design in some ways and totally abandoning it and pushing against it in other ways. Because of the obviously conditioning is the giant specter that haunts all of our charts. But so it's been really fascinating using that as a tool to go back through and say, that's why our constellation worked that way or had those points of tension or these points of, it was a beautiful epiphany process.
Yeah. I love that you're mentioning, because I was raised in a very Catholic environment as well. And just that naturally knowing, like, I guess the reflectorism of me was very conditioned for, 4 decades, I suppose. But even back then I could really resonate with my heretical self. Like that age 13, 14, it was just like, this is crap. This doesn't make sense. It was straight away. And I remember this just coming in and then standing strong in it and going, I am no longer going to mass every week because I don't believe it. It's not that I don't believe it, but it's just like, no.
Well, I used to get in trouble for asking questions with my first line. Like I remember getting a smack from a nun when I was little, because we were studying, I remember it was first grade. We were studying like Anasazi the spider and like all the different different folk tales and oral tradition. And I asked if the story of, the book of Genesis, like, and then there was light. And I asked if that could be oral tradition. Oh, Sister Dorothy was not happy with me. So like, I get it's, I totally, I vibe with you on that. It's interesting to see like where our essence kind of pushed back against the conditioning, even if we didn't know it, even when we were 6, when we were 5, when we were 13, like how that kind of, played out.
And the work that you do with even the shadow work, having those pinpricks of awareness back at these defining moments in your life, I've always kind of found them to be quite those moments in time where you just go, this was when it was exactly what you just said. It pushed too hard, and it was just like something inside of you just rises up and goes, no, going that way. Have you worked with that as well as a part of the shadow work that you do? Yeah.
Oh, and it's ongoing. Like I have
Yeah.
my personal kind of shadow work practice. I'm constantly like, I had another kind of epiphany the other day where I was like, oh, okay, got to move that from the brain to the body. So there's like what I do personally, but also when I'm working with clients and my community and folks with their chart, like it does become, those are beautiful gateways because then we see where we've maybe, there's that tension has always been present. And now we have a name for it. Now we can call it out. We can bring it into the light and we can
Yeah.
integrate it and we can not shame ourselves for self-abandoning or I don't know. It gives us that vantage point to go, okay, this was part of a pattern. What do I want to do with it now?
Yeah.
And, how do I, I did what I could at the time, as best I knew how. So like, let's also forgive and, do a little bit of inner child healing as well
I
for,
love it.
I'm proud of like little 6-year-old Jaclyn that was like, could this possibly be oral tradition? Like, I'm proud that I stood up and
Yes.
asked that question. Even though Sister Dorothy was not proud about that. Yeah. So that, yeah,
Yeah.
that's definitely a big theme in the work I do with folks.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I want to ask you, the work that you do, how do you honor your time? How do you honor your energy
Mm,
in this space? Because, you know, maybe a lot of people want to work with you. How do you manage that? Would you mind sharing that with us? Because I know
mm.
we're going to benefit from this too, to learn.
Um, I tried so what I've tried to do when I was building my offerings, because I always joke I'm a conscious reflector. Like if you just look at my conscious personality versus my unconscious design, like I sometimes like as I was looking and learning about all the parts of the chart, I wanted to look at my practice also through the lens of like how other people are experiencing my service. Like so if you have an open root center, how are you going to experience what I'm offering versus how I would experience it with it closed? And I actually started tailoring parts of like the infrastructure I had in my business, like around like the way different charts might experience it or present it. And I try to be as explicit as possible on my website about like what actually is entailed in my services so you know exactly what you're expecting. And that actually came from feedback from clients. One of the things I noticed when I first kind of opened my doors was I was doing a lot of redos for folks who had worked with somebody else and said, well, I went in for this reading and I thought we were going to talk about my incarnation cross. And I was told, no, that's another $200 and that's a different session. But I didn't know that going in. And so I was like, aha, how can I structure then so people know exactly like, okay, if you're getting a level 1 reading with me, here are the things we're going to cover. Here are the things we're not going to cover. And for my open root centered folks, it is spelled out. It is very clear. It is completely like, you know, exactly what you're getting and when you're getting it. And I had to put like structures in place. And as a Pisces moon, that did not come easily. I'm really lucky in that my progress move just moved into Virgo. So
Oh,
I feel like I've had a lot more structure naturally in the past maybe 6 months or so. But I think also thinking about how other people were experiencing the work beyond just me. But then I also had to balance that with like what feels good. And I know like I tried to do recorded readings for a while where it was just me and not someone in front of me. That doesn't work for my
mm,
energy. So I had to figure out like, okay, what is the thing that still gives me a sacral yes? What do I love talking about? How do I have a variety of things to talk about too? Because with the way my chart's wired, my root center will get bored if there doesn't feel like there's enough, variety or the pressure isn't there. So it has to be live. It has to be kind of a variety of things going on. I also figured out very early what my threshold was because I am so open. I'm not that traditional generator that can do reading, 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 reading,
yeah.
reading, reading. And then it's like, I could do 2 a day max, maybe 3. And then I need to like clear the
Yeah.
energy. I need to take a shower. I have a giant thing of salt I keep in my bathroom that I'm just kind of like, I do the scrubbing of like, let's let everything metaphorically kind of cleanse.
Yeah.
Um, because I just found that like there's certain like I have to figure out what feels joyful, but then I also have to think about how I'm positioning it so people can feel like they understand what it is, what it isn't, and their needs are met, and kind of the whole structuring of the thing. So I've gotten better at it over the
Mhm.
years, but yeah. So I hope that answers your
No,
question.
that was great, and that's really good back process to understand for people who get into this work or are working in this space, generators alike, reflectors, doesn't matter your profile. I think that just having those boundaries, for lack of better words, is very, very important
Mhm.
to prevent any form of burnout. So, yeah, thank you for sharing your process.
No, of course.
I want to ask you,
Mhm.
interior creature,
Mm,
how did you come up with this name?
mm.
Is
I
it
had
on
the
your
book
website?
next to
Did I
me.
not research that?
No, you're totally good. I think the story is buried somewhere. So I back when I had quit my corporate right before I quit my corporate job, I took about a week and I went up to Sedona in Arizona. And if you're not familiar with Sedona, Sedona is a energy vortex. It is one of the places in the United States beyond Kentucky. I think there's like the Mammoth Caves in Kentucky. There's a place in Anchorage in Alaska, and then Sedona in Arizona, where we have the largest concentration of quartz just naturally in the rock. So it literally is like quartz is an amplifier. So it is an energetic vortex. Like forget the woo woo part of it. Like you drive around the quarter of the mountains into Sedona, which is this beautiful kind of red rock mountain valley with just amazing hiking. And the weather is just beautiful. And it's like smack between Phoenix and Flagstaff. It's like a beautiful, beautiful part of the country. I was in a sales position when I left. So I took a week and basically like took all my vacation and parked myself in the good vibes for just to kind of recharge.
Yeah.
And I found the book. Oh, I remember what it was. I was out at breakfast and I had overheard a group of women talking about the book Women Who Run with the Wolves. And I don't know why it just popped in my head. And I was in a bookstore later and the book was sitting facing like right when I walked in on the shelf. So I grabbed a copy and Clarissa Pinkola Estes, which is amazing, amazing like storyteller. She talks about nourishing and finding your interior criatura because she speaks
Yeah.
Spanish and like
Yes. Yeah.
bringing it out into the light and like reassembling her. And I went, that's what I need to do. And I just like had this giant, I like remember I was in the like my hotel room, of course, drinking a bottle of wine, going, that's what I need to do. I don't know how to find her again. And that name just kind of stuck. Like, I got to find my interior creature. So then once I found human design, fell down that rabbit hole, built my website, I decided that was the name I had to go with. And she has this beautiful passage where she talks about how, a lot of us have been like, the skeleton of who we are has been like scattered all over the desert, and we need to like come together and gather the bones. And I was like, that's the work I want to do. I want to do this for me. I want to put my skeleton together, but I also want to help people gather their bones. Like, because the desert's big and vast and hot,
Yes.
and like it's easier to do that work together. So yeah, that's where it came from. So I can't take credit for the name. It definitely is a
Oh,
Dr. Pingola Estes reference,
yeah.
but her work is just transformational. And that book is a book I think everybody should read, regardless of like gender binary,
Yeah.
like men, women, because so many of us have crushed ourselves into what the dominant culture expects of us, and we've forgotten who we are at our most primal essence, like our truest soul level
Yeah.
essence.
I remember being gifted that book in my early 20s. I actually have two copies here.
Me
And I've
too.
read it multiple times. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just, I just had like a full body like ping when you were talking. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't get the connection. And now I got the
No.
connection. I'm like,
Yeah. And
whoa.
I didn't want to say creatora because
Yeah.
I'm French. I have the most French name possible. And I was like, let's just like, not appropriate a culture that's not mine. But I was like, I love that imagery. And
Yeah.
so it used to be, I think it's like still on my like homepage, like the little information about it. But yeah, that's where the name came from. Let's find and nourish your interior creature. Let's find her
Oh, I
again and
love it.
bring her back to the surface.
That is so beautiful. It just gives me warm fuzzies. Thank you. Whew. So where is Interior Creature going? You've just launched, or not just, but in the last couple of months, your
Mm,
own podcast, which is
I
super
did.
exciting. Can
Yeah.
you share with us about that and where you're going with Interior Creature?
Yeah. So I the thing that I've loved the most about just the work I've been able to do over the years is that kind of transformation from just doing like a straight readings with people to doing that kind of shadow work, that embodiment work. And so really what I've noticed is the natural evolution of my practice kind of falls into three buckets. So you've got the epiphanies where you first learn about your chart and you're like, your mind is blown and you want to like dive down the rabbit hole, but it's all very intellectual at that
Yeah.
point. You're making all these connections, but you haven't brought it from the brain to the body. Where my kind of practice has naturally evolved is like doing that work of it. I don't like the word coaching. And I know that like some people love that word. I don't personally love it, but the thought partnership of like, let's do that experimentation together. Let me help you kind of, I've been doing this work for 7+ years. Like, let me show you where I'm noticing things. Maybe I can reflect with a lot of my conscious reflectorness, some things back to you that like might be of service. Like, I want to walk alongside you as you're experimenting. And then I have a group that we also have a community where we do the embodiment work. So there's like the readings part, there's the sharing of the information, but there's also, and during the embodiment work, I've had some amazing conversations that like I always walk away better with my own practice as I'm working with my clients, the members of my community. I feel like they always give me so much. And I was like, I'm not seeing a lot beyond like what you're doing here. Like there's not a lot of podcasts in this space that are like, let's have a conversation where we're doing that work, where we're
Yeah.
looking at where things come from and it's vulnerable and it's real. And so that's where Interior Creature and Communion was born. So it's basically it's a weekly podcast. We're in season 1 right now. And we're like, my first episode, I featured a reflector because I'm very passionate about the way that generators and manifesting generators get centered sometimes in the human design discourse. And I'm like, nope, episode 1, we're going with a reflector. The next conversation you're going to hear is with a manifester. So I'm going to like, we're not centering the generators and bad gens. We've had our time in the sun. But I wanted to basically give people a place to kind of go and hear people's like epiphany, experimentation, embodiment journey in a really kind of authentic, vulnerable kind of space. So all my guests come in, they get a pseudonym to kind of protect their privacy so they feel comfortable kind of sharing of themselves. And then occasionally I bring in, like I had an amazing astrologer on this past week. We were talking about the move from Saturn in Aquarius to Saturn in Pisces. She's going to come back. We're going to talk about the Pluto shift we're experiencing this year. So I want to kind of show people too, like their astrology has a very prominent place in human design. It's not just one of the pillars that the system comes from. It can really, like working with the transits can be another transformational kind of, and you know that as a reflector, I mean, y'all live by the moon. You need to kind of know what's going on for your own processing. But
I've learned
all
so
of it,
much about astrology in the last X amount of years with human
yeah.
design. Astrology
Mm-hmm.
was very vague for me. Knew a bit,
Mm-hmm.
but not much. But I tell you what, it's a deep dive, especially when you've got to kind of go, wow, what is happening? I don't know who I am today.
I mean, even today, like for example, like right now as we're recording this, Mars is sitting in gate 12 in the throat center, activating the gate of caution. We've got the sun sitting in gate 22 in Pisces, which is activating the gate of openness. So you right now have a defined throat, have a defined solar plexus, have the channel of openness, which you're probably not used to. I typically only have gate 12 in my chart. So I all of a sudden have these feelings that are coming out of my mouth that I'm not realizing. And then we've got Jupiter and Chiron meeting in Aries, which Jupiter, of course, the planet of expansion, Chiron, the wounded healer. So all of these things are happening at once. And it's like, especially with the openness that we both have in our chart, obviously you having the more openness, like that sets the tone for the day. So it's good to kind of work with the transits to know like celestially what's the weather, as much as like, do I need an umbrella or not today? Like, do I need that extra sweater? Like,
Yes,
it's kind of important. Yeah.
it is. It is. And it's helped me so much. Like sometimes I don't track like I used to because I'm kind of like I feel into it, but I still
Mhm.
get thrown a little bit off guard and I'm like, what is that? What?
Yep.
Okay. And you'll go and have a look
Yep.
and you're like, oh,
Mm,
okay.
mm,
Careful.
yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Just calm that throat down, girl. Just
Yeah.
calm that throat down.
Mm-hmm.
How is deconditioning? Deconditioning gets thrown. The word gets thrown around
Ooh,
a lot.
yeah.
Lovingly, I know what it means. I just think that it's a deeper word than just deconditioning. But how's that been for you? You were saying that you've been in this space for over 7 years. So in the Ra terms, you
Mhm.
should have deconditioned.
Yeah, it's funny because I get where that comes from. I mean, there's this theory that what does it take 7 years for the cells in our body to completely regenerate? We have a whole new group of cells. The thing is, though, it's not a one and done. And I think that's the thing I get kind of a visceral reaction to sometimes in this space as well, is people are like, well, now that I've deconditioned my throat, and I'm like, have you though? Like, that's not a one and done? And even our closed centers, I know traditionally we say the closed centers can't be conditioned, but our relationship to the messages can be. And I mean, that was one of the biggest things you and I were talking about before we started recording was one of the biggest things I had to work through in my own chart was how much I was outsourcing my decision making through my open centers and how much I was self abandoning through not listening to my closed centers and their messages. And so, my personal kind of theory with deconditioning, it's not about isolating yourself and getting just in your own pristine, immaculate vibes. It's more of like, I need to know what my home frequency feels like. I need to
Yes.
know how other people are impacting and affecting me. I need to take responsibility for that too, because there are going to be certain energies that don't feel good, other energies that feel really supportive, but I can't change other people. I can only work on myself. So, how am I going to allow this awareness that I now have of these energetic, imprints I'm getting from other people, the way my energy is impacting them? How am I going to use that for good? How am I going to
Yeah.
use that to grow, to expand? And so, I don't think of deconditioning as like, I think that's why I use the term shadow work, because I almost feel like there's this integration that needs to happen. There's times where we were working against our design that probably didn't work to our advantage. And like, let's understand them. Let's try to, integrate that part of us, because all of it is us. Like the
Yeah.
darker parts of the energies, that's part of why I love the gene keys, this kind of range of frequencies that we experience. We're all capable of all of it, from the divine city kind of energy down to the repressive reactive and the that fear frequency. All of it is us. And so owning that,
Mm.
understanding that, and trying to actively decide what energies you want to bring in, and then not beating yourself up if you're like, that was a repressive decision I made today, or that was a reactive decision I made today, or it's just understanding that internal weather, and just loving yourself through it, and trying to allow it to help you level up. And there's no such thing as deconditioned. Like I
Yes.
always tell people, take the 7 years, throw it out the window. It's a lifelong process. You haven't arrived. And you're gonna, and none of us are an island. And I think that's the other thing that I always keep in mind is with this age of Aquarius, like we are on the doorstep of the age of Aquarius. I know the astrologers are all arguing about when
When,
and what
yeah.
day. I like to think of it as we opened the screen door, we've just stepped over the threshold, we haven't even taken our shoes off yet. We're just kind of beginning to step into this energy, which is the energy of community, which is the energy of interpersonal and interconnectedness, of really understanding our oneness. And so, yeah, like it's important for us to honor ourselves as an individual so we can show up for the collective. But we can't, like, we can't silo off and say, I'm a reflector. I'm never going to hang out with anyone who's not a reflector because they're going to my energy, which I've seen. There's some Facebook groups that are fun where it's like, if you're not a projector, you're not allowed in here. And it's like, you're going to condition our energy. And I'm like, oh, you must be fun at a party. Like it just like we have to be around other people. So I see it
It
as a
is
tool and not as yeah.
it is a big thing. I shouldn't say big, that's a bit of an exaggeration here, but it is a bit of a thing. Some of the first things that you read of, people say, well, if you're a reflector, you need to go away for a month. You need to be on your own. You need to
Mm,
pack your bags and leave. And it's
mm.
just like, are you kidding? How
And,
does that
and
work? We need to live in this world. And I
mhm,
think most of the true healing and let's use that word deconditioning for
mhm,
all of us is being present in
mhm.
society and
Yes.
understanding and knowing, okay, these are patterns that I've had.
Mhm,
There's a lot of the grief process. There's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot
mhm,
of just honoring, oh my gosh, okay, it's
mhm.
all allowed. I always say that to people. It's all allowed here.
Yep.
Everything.
All of it is us. It's all allowed.
Yep.
I also love when I first read, I think it was Krakauer that said, because I don't like to call him Ra. That's not, because it always felt a little appropriative to me. And I have a lot of clients that have been like, yeah, like they're anyway. But one of the things he says is that, like, oh, reflectors need their own wing of the house. And I always found that to be so out of touch, because I'm like, who has wing of the house money? Like, who are you talking about? Like, I had lived in New York City in like 300 square feet in a shoebox for years. I'm like, wing of the house. Like, so we also have to democratize this
Yeah.
information so it's like accessible to people. And like, that must be nice. Like, to go, I'm a reflector, I have to have my own wing. It's like, I would love to have my own wing too.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So we did kind of something. So I'm a big about the pragmatic,
Yes.
practical, real world application. And how are we really going to, again, kind of create this, and again, Garden of Eden, my brain goes to how are
Yeah.
we going to create the heaven on earth, which
Yes.
is this interconnected, supportive community. Like, we get to give you your space, but also make you feel comfortable when you're within the community. And that's us also taking like ownership for our own energetic, imprint
Exactly.
too.
No, polish your own mirror. Everybody just polish our own mirror. I love
Mm.
you. You're amazing.
Oh,
I love having this chat with you. It's so
oh,
lovely. It's
this
just
has been
it's
lovely.
a breath of fresh air and I'm really glad that we're getting to sit in this space. Now, you have probably in your time worked with a lot of reflectors. How can this community work with you?
Yeah. So if you're just kind of coming to your chart for the first time, I do like entry level readings. We'll talk about what it means to be a reflector. Some of the stuff you might have read that is scary, that's probably not as accurate. Like we'll talk about that, how to navigate the lunar cycle. But I also higher level readings that I think a lot of reflectors um, would be really beneficial to take advantage of. Like I do a level 2 and a level 3 where we do a deep dive on your gates, because the gates are really the lens through which you experience your energy. And like I always hate when they describe reflectors as like, you're just completely empty vessels and none of it is you and all of it's everybody else. And I'm like, that is really disempowering. No, thank you. Like, we'll talk about what's yours and these energies, these gifts that you have, and the way you can kind of fill in puzzle pieces and be that kind of missing link for a lot of us who are like, we'll talk about all the amazing things in your chart. And I do another level of reading where we go on this like excavation by pairing your chart with your astrology and really getting specific in terms of like, okay, so this gate lives in this house and it's governed by this zodiac sign. And how does that like fit in? And then there's a transit that's coming up. So energetic forecast, that's one way. Or if you're really interested in the deconditioning process, I do have a community called the Karmic Studies Elevator where there is a part of it that's like a course you can take where you can go in and like study on your own the different parts and pieces. You know me, you think my website's a beast, you should see what I built for the Karmic Studies Elevator. It's videos and PDFs and journal pages that you can like literally nerd out on any part of your chart. And we follow some of the similar like gene keys processes. We do like a whole genius sequence. We go through like the different, I have my own version of that, but we also meet weekly and we meet in community. And it's beautiful to have this like hierarchical learning where it's like, what are we wrestling with this week? And what are we noticing? Or, oh, I was looking at my dad's chart the other day and here's something I was wondering about. Let's pull it up on the screen. Let's look at it together. We all were conditioned in community. It makes sense to decondition in community as well and to kind of heal in community. So those are like my favorites. Right now, it's like we have a couple of different spots a week where we just come together as community and we talk about, this work and like in the real world, actually doing it and embodying it. How does that feel? And so that's been really beautiful, to kind of to share space with people for that as well.
That sounds incredible. Yeah. And as a fully open being, it's just like we kind of like, is it safe for us to go out there? As I was saying before, a part of this is just like we sometimes withdraw to heal and get our bearings.
Yep.
Then we can start dipping our toe back into the world. And I think just having these spaces of dipping our toe back in is really beneficial.
Our core values too are like curiosity, compassion. Like we don't judge things. We get curious about where they might have come from. We get compassionate with ourselves, with each other. And we really try to kind of like build a container where it does feel safe to kind of ask the questions and not know and have the answer. So, because like, I hear you, like I did a lot of like by myself on my own, journaling, crying, screaming into a pillow. And, that works only but then if you really want to get to some of the deep stuff, like it helps to have folks who can mirror that back and that you can mirror back to as well. And so, yeah, I find these spaces, I want to create the space I hadn't seen yet either. That's kind of, I always find I'm like looking for the thing and I'm like, I don't see it. I'm going to build it. Like, because I have the yes too.
Yeah.
And I have energy too. I could do that for you. I have the generator energy. I'll build the thing.
That's okay. That's you do that. you do that. Thank you.
Yep. Of course.
Would you share your social media? I think I'll just put it in there anyway, Interior Creature. And then you've also got the additional one for the podcast.
Yeah. So it's pretty much the same everywhere. I have a YouTube channel. It's at Interior Creature, all one word. So Instagram, I'm at Interior Creature and at Interior Creature in Communion for the podcast. If you want just podcast related content. I just started TikTok. I'm turning 40 on the 13th. So I don't know if that's the space for me. Like it is not, I'm not going to be dancing. I'm not going to be doing all the trend things, but I'm kind of experimenting with that space as well. So same at Interior Creature. And then the podcast, you can listen to Interior Creature at Communion, or in Communion, wherever you get your podcasts. It's pretty widely available. So yeah. And then Interior Creature is the website. Yeah.
InteriorCreature.com. What a beautiful gift you are to the world. Thank you so very much for everything that you do, all the resources that you provide to the community, and just being you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to reconnecting with you at another time. But for now, we'll wrap this one up.
I would love that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.